Sometimes the past doesn't knock, it slips under your door in an envelope, carrying words sharp enough to reopen wounds you thought had healed. 3 years is a long time to go without hearing from your only daughter. Long enough for silence to feel normal, long enough for the wound to scab over, but not nearly long enough for it to heal. Emily left after our last fight, and though I've lived 6 decades, that night is burned into my memory as clear as yesterday. She was 25 then, stubborn, fiery, and tired of my lectures. I was 57, tired in my own way, of watching her make mistakes, of warning her about the people she surrounded herself with, of trying to protect her when she didn't want protecting. We shouted. God, did we shout? She said I was controlling, that I wanted her to live the way I thought was best. I said she was reckless, blind to the fact that the man she was seeing, a smooth talker named Kyle, was using her. Words flew sharp as knives, and neither of us dodged. Finally, she stood at the doorway with her suitcase, eyes blazing with anger and pain. "You'll regret this, Dad," she said. I told her if she walked out, she might not find the door open again. It was the worst thing I could have said. The door slammed, and the silence that followed stretched into years. I told myself I wouldn't wait by the phone, wouldn't glance at every envelope in the mailbox hoping to see her handwriting. But who was I kidding? A father's heart doesn't harden that easily. On birthdays, I found myself buying a cake anyway, just in case. At Christmas, I set her stocking out, even though it stayed empty. 3 years of waiting. 3 years of nothing. Until today. The letter came in a plain white envelope, unremarkable except for the careful script of my name, Paul Harris. No return address. Postmark blurred. I stood in the doorway holding it, my hands suddenly heavy, my stomach twisted. For a long time, I didn't open it. I carried it into the kitchen, set it on the table, made myself a cup of coffee, then just sat staring at it while the steam curled and vanished. My heart pounded the way it hadn't since I was a boy waiting for a girl's answer to a love note. Finally, I slid a finger under the flap and unfolded the page inside. "Dear Dad, I know it's been a long time. I want to make things right. Can we meet? I'll be at the old park bench near the lake this Saturday at 5 p.m. Signed, Emily." I read it 3 times, my eyes burning. Relief hit first, like cool water after years in a desert. She wanted to see me. She wanted to come back. But then unease crept in. The words were hers, but they weren't. Emily never wrote like this. Her letters used to spill across the page in half-formed thoughts and too many commas, a mess of emotion. This letter was neat. Precise. Clipped. I brought it closer to the light, sliding on my reading glasses. That's when I noticed it, faint indentations on the page, as if the letter had been written on top of another sheet. Curves and lines that didn't match the words in front of me. My chest tightened. Someone had used this paper before. I tilted it, angling it under the lamp. A few partial letters caught the light, ghostly shapes pressed into the fibers. It wasn't much, not yet, but it was enough to set my pulse racing. If this was really Emily reaching out, why did it feel so cold? So unlike her? And why did it look like something had been erased, hidden, buried beneath the words? I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and set it on the table. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the knowledge that after 3 years of silence, this wasn't a reunion. It was a warning. And whether Emily wrote it or not, I knew one thing for certain: the past wasn't finished with me. The truth has a way of hiding in plain sight, if you're willing to look closer, even at the words that were never meant for your eyes. The letter wouldn't let me rest. I sat at the kitchen table long after the sun went down, the single bulb buzzing faintly overhead, shadows stretching across the room. The envelope lay in front of me, plain and white, but it might as well have been a loaded gun. I'd read Emily's words at least a dozen times. Every reading left me more unsettled. "Dear Dad, I know it's been a long time. I want to make things right." That wasn't her voice. My Emily was never concise. She poured herself onto paper, long-winded, emotional, doodles in the margins, ink smudges where tears had fallen. This was sterile. Precise. Like someone had scrubbed the emotion right out of her. I told myself maybe 3 years had changed her. People change, especially when they're trying to bridge old wounds. But still, unease itched under my skin. I reached for a pencil from the drawer, an old carpenter's pencil, its edges worn flat from years of sharpening with a knife. I laid the letter flat and began shading lightly across the blank spaces, letting the graphite settle into the grooves. At first, nothing. Then, slowly, faint lines began to emerge, ghostly impressions just under the surface. Curves, slants, fragments of words. My heart thudded as the shapes took form. I leaned closer, squinting in the dim light. One line looked like numbers, maybe a phone number or a date. Another seemed to hold the beginning of a name, Kai. I froze. Kyle. The name itself was enough to sour my stomach. I hadn't spoken it aloud in years, but it had haunted me every day since Emily walked out. Kyle was trouble from the first handshake. Too polished, too quick with compliments, his eyes always calculating. He had a way of making people feel like they were the only one in the room, but I'd seen the cracks, the glances at his phone when Emily wasn't looking, the smirk when I tried to talk sense into her. I remembered one night 3 years back. Emily came home late, her hair a mess, her smile wide. I asked her where she'd been. She said, "Kyle took me out, just a drive, just some fun." But her eyes were glassy, her laugh forced. I told her he was using her, pulling her away from everything steady in her life. She exploded at me. Said I didn't trust her, didn't respect her choices. The argument that night spiraled into the last one we ever had. And when she left, it was Kyle's car idling at the curb, headlights cutting through the dark, waiting to swallow her whole. Now here was his name again, ghosted into the paper that carried her supposed words. I set the pencil down, hands trembling, and fetched an old magnifying glass from my workshop drawer. Under its circle of glass, the indentations sharpened. Not just Kai, but what looked like the rest of his name, pressed faintly but unmistakably. A few numbers followed, though not clear enough to read. I dropped the glass onto the table, the clunk echoing in the empty kitchen. If Kyle had touched this paper, if he had anything to do with this letter, then this wasn't reconciliation. This was bait. I sat back hard, staring at the folded sheet. My mind raced. Was Emily behind this? Or had Kyle forged her voice, her script, trying to lure me in? If she'd written it under his watch, was it a cry for help, or was it his hand guiding hers? The clock ticked loud on the wall, each second dragging me further into doubt. I poured myself a drink, just a finger of whiskey, and let it burn down my throat. The warmth steadied me, though the knot in my chest refused to loosen. If it really was Emily reaching out, I couldn't ignore her. She was still my daughter. Blood of my blood. And if she was trapped, if Kyle was behind this, then maybe this was the only chance I'd have to get her back. But if it was a trap, and I walked into it blind. I stood and paced the kitchen, the floorboards creaking under my steps. Hope pulled me one way, fear the other. 3 years of silence had nearly broken me. Could I survive walking away now, if it really was her? Finally, I knew the answer. I couldn't ignore it. Saturday at 5 p.m. I'd be at that park bench by the lake. But I wouldn't go as the desperate, broken father they expected. I'd go prepared. Because whether it was Emily waiting, or Kyle, or something else entirely, one thing was clear: this letter wasn't about reconciliation. It was a test. And if it was a trap, I'd be ready to spring it on them instead. When you're heading into a storm, you don't pray for calm skies, you prepare for the lightning. The days between the letter's arrival and Saturdays stretched like years. I carried it everywhere in my mind, replaying every line, every curve of Emily's handwriting. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I convinced myself it had to be her. My little girl had finally come back. Other times, in the harsh light of morning, I saw only Kyle's smirk behind the neat sentences. I didn't sleep much. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling fan, hearing echoes of her laughter from when she was small, running through the yard, her hair flying behind her, calling, "Daddy, look!" Only for the memory to twist into the image of her storming out with her suitcase, Kyle's car waiting. By Wednesday, I decided I couldn't just wait for Saturday to arrive. If I was going to meet whoever sat on that bench, I needed to be ready. I started with the obvious. Clothes. I picked a dark jacket with deep pockets, something comfortable but not flashy. Shoes I could move in. I wasn't planning on running, but I wasn't planning on being caught flat-footed either. Next, tools. From my desk drawer, I took out the old pocket knife my father had given me. I hadn't carried it in years, but the weight of it in my hand brought a strange comfort. I also slipped a small voice recorder into my pocket, a gadget I'd bought years back and barely used. If this was a trap, I wanted proof of whatever words were said. Then I did something I hadn't done in decades. I scouted. Thursday afternoon, I drove to the park. The lot was nearly empty, just a couple of cars under the shade of the oaks. I walked slow, my stitches tugging at my side, but determination keeping me upright. The lake stretched wide and still, its surface reflecting the late sun. Ducks floated lazily near the reeds, unbothered. The old park bench sat near the water's edge, worn wood splintered from years of weather, graffiti carved deep into the slats. I ran a hand over the backrest, feeling the grooves of strangers' names and declarations of love. From the bench, I studied the view. The path wound around the lake, disappearing into trees. To the left, a small footbridge arched over a narrow channel. To the right, the parking lot sat 100 yards away, open but distant. I checked angles. Where could someone hide? The cluster of trees near the footbridge. The shadow of the maintenance shed. Even the reeds by the shore were tall enough to conceal someone crouching. I sat for a while, letting the quiet seep in. Couples passed, joggers nodded, but no one gave me a second glance. Still, I felt eyes on me, maybe memory, maybe paranoia. As I left, I traced my steps back carefully, noting every sound, every line of sight. Friday was worse. My mind ping-ponged between longing and suspicion. One moment, I pictured Emily waiting on that bench, her face softened by time, her arms open. The next, I saw Kyle stepping out of the shadows, smug, holding the strings of the game. By evening, I poured another drink, just one, and laid the letter flat on the table again. I studied it until my vision blurred. "Emily," I whispered, "if it's really you, God, I'll be there. But if it's him..." I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to. Saturday morning dawned gray, clouds heavy with the promise of rain. I dressed slow, deliberate. Jacket, recorder, knife. I checked my pockets twice, then a third time. In the mirror, the man staring back wasn't the broken father they expected. He was older, yes. Weathered. But his jaw was set, his eyes steady. If Emily was there, I'd embrace her. If Kyle was there, I'd face him. And if it was something worse, something I hadn't yet imagined, then I'd be ready for that too. Because one thing was certain, I wasn't walking into that park as a victim. I was walking in prepared for war. Hope can blind a man, but suspicion sharpens his sight, and when I reached the park that evening, both were waging war inside me. The drive to the park felt longer than it was. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than they should have, knuckles pale in the fading light. Every red light felt like a test of patience, every passing car like a distraction I couldn't afford. The letter sat folded in my jacket pocket, its weight heavier than paper should allow. When I turned into the lot by the lake, the sky was already shifting to dusk. Clouds hung low and gray, heavy with the threat of rain. The air carried that faint metallic scent it always does before a storm. There weren't many cars. A minivan near the playground, a sedan under the oak trees, one truck parked crooked along the far side. Ordinary. But ordinary can hide danger if you're looking for it. I cut the engine and sat for a moment, just watching. A jogger passed along the path, earbuds in, oblivious. A couple sat on a blanket near the water, heads bent together in a world of their own. A man cast a fishing line off the pier, shoulders hunched against the wind. Nothing out of place. Yet the hair on the back of my neck stood up anyway. Finally, I stepped out of the car, pulling my jacket tighter around me. My fingers brushed the recorder in my pocket, feeling the steady blink of its tiny red light. My knife was there too, cool metal pressing against my palm. I wasn't foolish enough to think it made me safe, but it reminded me I wasn't walking in defenseless. The path crunched under my shoes as I made my way toward the bench. Each step seemed louder than it should have, the sound of gravel carrying across the stillness. My eyes scanned everything, the reeds along the shore, tall enough to conceal someone crouching. The shadow of the maintenance shed. The trees near the footbridge, dark clusters where anyone could wait. When I finally saw the bench, my heart slammed in my chest. At first glance, it looked empty. For a moment I thought the whole thing had been a cruel joke, a letter, a trick, nothing more. My stomach twisted. Then I saw her. A figure sat hunched at the far end, head bowed, hair falling forward in loose strands. My breath caught in my throat. For a dizzy second, I was convinced it was Emily. My Emily, back after all these years, waiting just like she'd written. "Emily?" I called softly, my voice unsteady. The figure didn't move. Then, slowly, the head lifted. My hope collapsed in an instant. It wasn't Emily. The face that turned toward me was sharper, older than hers, painted with heavy makeup. A stranger, though not completely. I recognized her faintly, a ghost from the past. I'd seen her once before, hanging off Kyle's arm at a party he'd dragged Emily to. Her name scraped at the edge of memory. Sharon? Shannon? Something like that. "Mr. Harris," she said, lips curling into a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Nice of you to come." My stomach dropped. The letter hadn't been from Emily at all. "Where is she?" I demanded, my voice harsher than I intended. The woman tilted her head, studying me like a cat studies a cornered mouse. "Relax. She's around. Kyle thought it would be best if we talked first." Kyle. Hearing his name after 3 years was like reopening an old wound. My hand tightened around the recorder in my pocket. "If Emily wanted to see me, she'd be here herself," I said flatly. "She does want to see you," the woman replied smoothly. "But you know how things are. Complicated." She asked Kyle to handle the details. Lie. Emily would never send Kyle in her place. I glanced around, the trees, the reeds, the cars in the lot. No sign of anyone else. But that didn't settle me. If Kyle was behind this, he wasn't far. I sat down at the opposite end of the bench, keeping distance. "Then tell me why I'm here," I said. The woman's smile widened. "Because Emily's in a tough spot. And you, Mr. Harris, are the solution." Her words were smooth, practiced. I leaned back, staring at her, heart heavy with both dread and fury. Whatever this was, it wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't about a father and daughter healing old wounds. It was about leverage. When someone starts talking in circles, it's because the truth is sharper than they want you to notice, and as she spoke, every word was a blade aimed at my chest. The woman sat across from me like she had all the time in the world, legs crossed, nails tapping against the arm of the bench. Her casual posture didn't fool me, she was here with a purpose. "Emily's been struggling," she began, her voice laced with false sympathy. "She fell in with some bad situations, made choices that didn't pan out. You know how young people are." Her words made my teeth clench. "Say what you mean," I snapped. She smiled faintly, as if she enjoyed my impatience. "What I mean is, she needs help. And Kyle, well, Kyle's been doing his best, but you know how expensive things can get. He thought you'd want to step in." Hearing his name after all these years lit a fire in my gut. I gripped the edge of the bench so tightly my knuckles whitened. "Emily doesn't need Kyle. And she sure as hell doesn't need you delivering his messages." "Oh, but she does," the woman replied smoothly, her eyes glinting in the fading light. "She's in over her head. Debts. Promises she couldn't keep. People are getting impatient. If you don't step in, things might get uncomfortable for her. That word, uncomfortable, dripped with menace. I stared out over the lake for a moment, watching ripples spread across the gray water. The ducks near the reeds quacked softly, oblivious to the storm brewing just a few feet away. My chest felt tight, not from age or strain, but from anger. Emily, my little girl, tangled in trouble again, and all roads led back to Kyle. Memories pressed in. I thought of the night I first met him, his slick handshake, the way his smile never reached his eyes. I'd seen men like him at the plant, hustlers who cut corners, who knew how to charm until you owed them. Emily was dazzled. She thought his bravado was confidence. I knew it was hunger. Emily's fine, I said firmly, trying to convince myself as much as her. She doesn't need this. The woman leaned closer, her perfume sharp in the cool evening air. Mr. Harris, she's not fine. She's barely holding on. She owes people. Kyle's been covering for her, but he can't keep it up forever. He thought you'd want the chance to step in, as her father. My blood boiled at the word covering. Kyle didn't cover for anyone unless there was something in it for him. He was a leech, and now he was bleeding Emily dry. What does he want? I asked flatly. She feigned innocence. Want? Oh, nothing dramatic. Just support. Some help from her dear old dad. A man of your means could make her problems disappear with a signature or two, maybe a check here and there. It would be painless. Painless. That word landed like a stone. It was the same kind of sugar-coated poison I'd heard before. Painless for them, maybe. Not for me. Not for Emily. I took a slow breath, forcing down the urge to grab her by the shoulders and shake the lies out of her. If Emily wanted my help, she could have come herself. She wouldn't send a stranger. Stranger? She laughed softly, shaking her head. Oh, come now. We've met before. Remember? That night at the party. I was with Kyle. Emily trusted me then, and she trusts me now. I remembered. I remembered her sharp laugh, the way she whispered into Kyle's ear while Emily tried to pretend she didn't notice. I remembered the way Kyle's eyes roved the room, always searching for the next opportunity, never resting on my daughter the way they should have. I leaned forward, my voice low, dangerous. Tell Kyle this. If he wants to talk, he can look me in the eye himself. I don't deal with messengers. For the first time, her smile slipped. Just a flicker, but I caught it. Then she recovered, leaning back casually again. He thought you might say that. That's why he told me to deliver a simple message. She tilted her head, her eyes hardening. Help us, or Emily won't be safe. The words hit me like ice water. I sat frozen, my mind spinning, rage and fear colliding. I'd known this wasn't about reconciliation, but hearing it said aloud, that was different. This wasn't about making peace. This was about leverage. And Emily was the pawn. It's one thing to be threatened. It's another to have your child dangled like bait, and as I drove home, I realized I wasn't just angry. I was ready for war. The woman's words clung to me like smoke. Help us, or Emily won't be safe. I replayed them over and over as I drove, knuckles white against the steering wheel. The tires hummed against the pavement, each mile dragging me deeper into a storm I hadn't chosen but couldn't escape. Streetlights flickered past like watchful eyes. Every red light felt like a test of my patience, every stop sign a chance for the fury boiling inside me to spill over. The night outside pressed against the windshield, thick and unforgiving. I caught glimpses of myself in the glass, jaw clenched, face lined, eyes burning. I looked like a man half a second away from breaking. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my chest ached from holding myself so rigid. I cut the engine and sat in the silence, hands still gripping the wheel. For a long moment I didn't move. When I finally stepped inside, I didn't bother with the lights. The house greeted me with the same stillness it always did, shadows stretching across the furniture, the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I stood in the middle of the living room and let the darkness swallow me whole. Could Emily really be in danger? Or was Kyle using her as bait, dangling her name like a hook, waiting for me to bite. Memories came rushing unbidden. Emily at 5 years old, chasing fireflies in the yard, her laughter ringing through the twilight. Emily at 10, curled on the couch beside her mother, eyes wide at some cartoon, clutching a bowl of popcorn bigger than her head. Emily at 16, storming up the stairs after an argument, her bedroom door slamming like a gunshot. And Emily at 19, her suitcase in her hand, Kyle's car idling at the curb. Her eyes blazing with anger, mine with fear. That was the night I lost her. 3 years of silence. And now, suddenly, this. I poured myself a glass of water, but my hand shook as I lifted it. The glass clinked against my teeth, a sound too loud in the empty house. I set it down and pressed my palms flat against the table, forcing myself to breathe. Rage would get me nowhere. Rage was what Kyle wanted. He fed on it, thrived on chaos. I had to be smarter. So I thought through the options. Pay them? No. That was surrender. Once I gave Kyle what he wanted, he'd bleed me dry. It wouldn't stop with one payment. It never did with men like him. Ignore them? Dangerous. If Emily really was in trouble, I'd never forgive myself for walking away. Confront them head on? Suicide. Kyle didn't fight clean. He never had. He was a man who pulled strings from the shadows, always making someone else take the fall. That left one option: outsmart him. I began pacing the room, the old floorboards creaking with every step. The house seemed to echo my movements, restless as I was. My reflection caught in the darkened window, a man in his 60s, shoulders stooped but eyes still sharp. Some would see weakness. Kyle certainly would. But they'd be wrong. I'd carried burdens before, worked double shifts, lost sleep, lost love. I'd survived more storms than Kyle could imagine. And I still had fight left in me. I pulled the recorder from my pocket, its small red light blinking steadily. Proof. Evidence. Her words captured, every threat preserved. It wasn't much, but it was something. I set it on the table and leaned over it, whispering to myself. You wanted leverage, Kyle? You just gave me mine. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak and settle around me. Every sound made me tense. The wind rattling the windows, the faint bark of a dog in the distance, the hum of a car passing by. My body was still, but my mind churned. Images of Emily came and went, her as a child, her as a young woman, her as someone I might not even recognize anymore. Was she truly in danger? Or was she already lost to Kyle's poison? When dawn finally crept through the blinds, painting pale stripes across the ceiling, I felt no relief. But I did feel clarity. I knew what I had to do. I'd play along. Just enough to keep them talking. Just enough to make them believe I was weakening, that I was the desperate father they thought they could control. And then, when they leaned in too close, when they thought they had me cornered, I'd flip the game. Because they weren't the only ones who knew how to set a trap. If the enemy expects a broken man, you give them one, but only on the surface. Underneath, you sharpen the knife. The morning after the ultimatum felt like walking through fog. I went through the motions, shaving, brewing coffee, reading the newspaper without seeing a word, but my mind was fixed on one thought: how to turn their trap back on them. I stood at the kitchen window, staring at the yard. The grass was long, the fence weathered, but what I saw wasn't the present. I saw Emily at 8 years old, chasing the neighbor's dog across that lawn, her laughter piercing the summer heat. That memory was my anchor. She was still out there somewhere, under Kyle's thumb, waiting for me to act. But if I stormed in like the furious father they expected, I'd lose her before I even got close. Kyle thrived on chaos. He wanted me reckless. No. I had to be the opposite. I had to play weak. Let them think I was desperate, hesitant, easy to control. A broken man, dangling by guilt and longing. So I practiced. Yes, practiced. I sat at the table and spoke aloud, softening my voice, adding hesitations, forcing tremors into my words. I just want to help Emily. I don't know what to do. Over and over until even I believed it. That afternoon, I picked up the phone. My hand hovered over the keypad for a long moment before I dialed the faint digits I'd uncovered from the letter's indentations. It rang twice. Then her voice answered, smooth as oil. Mr. Harris. I was wondering when you'd call. I let silence hang, then forced a shaky breath. I've been thinking about what you said. Good, she replied quickly. Kyle will be pleased. The mention of his name made my jaw clench, but I kept my tone small, wavering. I don't know how much I can do. I'm not made of money. Her laugh was soft, dismissive. That's not the point. Emily doesn't need you to empty your pockets. Just gestures. A signature here, a little support there. Enough to show you're willing. I sighed into the receiver, letting the sound crack. If it'll keep her safe. She pounced on the words. Exactly. That's all we want. Her safety. Meanwhile, the recorder sat on the table, its red light blinking steadily. Every word, every threat preserved. I pushed harder, feigning doubt. How do I even know she's really with you? How do I know she's alive? For the first time, her voice sharpened. You'll see her soon enough. But Kyle needs assurance first. He needs to know you're serious. I made my voice falter. I just need time. A pause. Then her tone cooled, the edge of impatience bleeding through. Not too much time. Delay is dangerous. People are getting restless. With that, she ended the call. I sat in silence, staring at the recorder. My heart hammered, but a strange calm rode beneath it. I had what I needed, her voice on tape, her threats clear as day. It wasn't enough to end this yet, but it was a start. The rest of the day, I prepared. I dug through old boxes in the garage, pulling out files I'd nearly forgotten, receipts, documents, scraps of Kyle's old schemes I'd kept out of spite. My hands shook as I sifted through them, but my resolve hardened with each piece I found. Kyle had always been a con man. Quick with charm, quicker with lies. He'd borrowed money from Emily under the guise of investments, left her with nothing but excuses. I remembered the day I confronted him, years ago, his smirk telling me he wasn't afraid. He'd said, "You can't stop me, old man. Emily trusts me more than she trusts you." That smirk had haunted me for 3 years. But this time, I wasn't walking in blind. As night fell, I picked up the phone once more. My voice was tired, worn down, every syllable dripping with the act I'd perfected. "Fine," I muttered. "Tell me what Kyle wants me to do." Her laugh slid through the receiver like a blade. "Smart man. Meet us tomorrow night. This time, Kyle wants to see you himself." I hung up slowly, pulse quickening. Exactly what I wanted. You spend years rehearsing how you'll react to a ghost, then the ghost shows up with a grin, and you realize the rehearsal was for someone else's play. I'd imagined 100 scenarios on the drive over, leaning toward the melodramatic, picturing running into Kyle's arms and tearing him apart with my bare hands, or collapsing into Emily's shoulders and sobbing until my chest hurt. Reality, as it tends to do, was flat and sharper than any fantasy. We met in a strip mall diner 2 towns over, the kind of place whose vinyl booths have permanent impressions and whose coffee tastes like old pennies. Kyle picked the spot. That was part of his arrogance. He liked neutral places where nothing belonged to him. It made him feel more dangerous, like a wolf among sheep. I arrived early, parking 2 blocks away so no one would see me pacing the lot, practicing how tired and beaten I would sound. I had the recorder in my breast pocket and the pocket knife, useless perhaps against men half my age but comforting enough to remind me I hadn't come to plead. He was already there when I went in, broad-shouldered, casual in a jacket that cost as much as my monthly mortgage when he wasn't looking. He waved me over with the same bland smile I remembered, the one that said charm and calculation in the same breath. A woman I didn't know sat opposite him, but she faded into the margins the second Kyle cleared his throat. "Paul," he said, all company smiles, standing as if he'd been taught manners for people with something to lose. He offered a hand. I took it, feeling the fake warmth in his palm. His nails were clean, his handshake firm, practiced. "You've got nerve to show," I said, dropping the act just as we sat. There was a hum of the grill in the background, the waitress refilling coffee like she'd been doing it for 50 years. Kyle's eyes flicked to my pockets, to my hands, then back up, calculating. "Nerve," he echoed lightly. "I thought maybe you'd be too busy crying into that recliner of yours." He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "But let's not be dramatic. I like a straightforward conversation." I kept my voice calm. "Emily safe?" He let the question hang, amused. "The truth isn't dramatic, Paul. It's practical." He reached into his jacket, not in a threatening way. He liked rubbing that leash of control in my face, and produced a small envelope. "We've been patient, but patience has its limits. People get jittery. We need assurances." "You mean money?" I said. "Or a transfer. Or something with signatures." He shrugged. "Support. A guarantee that you're willing to look after your daughter properly. Contracts avoid complications." I could feel my pulse along my throat, but I kept my face blank. "Where's she?" His smile tilted, the kind a fox wears before a trick. "Cooperative but frightened. She's kept herself in line, mostly. That's the point, we don't need to hurt her. We need you to cooperate." It was a soft threat wrapped in velvet. The kind meant to make a man slide exactly where they wanted him. I swallowed and leaned in, angling my body like a man who had something to lose and a plan to protect. "I'll help," I said, slow, deliberate. "But I want to see her. I want proof, a photo, a call, something that tells me she's really there and not whatever you think you can hide." My voice trembled in the right places. I let the exhaustion sound real. Kyle's eyes narrowed, a small flash of annoyance. "You don't get to bargain on the first night, old man. That's not how trust works." "Then trust will have to come from proof," I insisted. "I'm not signing anything blind. Not after what you did." The woman I hadn't noticed spoke up then, voice like silk over slate. "Kyle has been generous," she said. "It's not in his interest to hurt her if you cooperate. That's not what this is about." So she was part of the network, not just muscle, but the kind who smooths edges, who scripts tones to make men like Kyle sound reasonable. People like her made threats feel like options. I kept my eye on her hand the whole time. She held a small phone, screen dark. If she sent a message now, who knows what could happen? If she took a picture, if someone triggered some chain of events, it could be over in minutes. "You gave me a letter," I said. The handwriting wasn't hers. Someone pressed something under the page. I found his name faint on the paper. "You come to me with Emily dangling like payment and expect me to sign blind?" Kyle's face tightened. For a brief second, I saw the man behind the mask, less confident, the glint of panic when he realizes an angle he relied on has been noticed. "She's been influenced," he said carefully. "People make mistakes. Wrong moves. You can fix it for her." "By handing over my life?" I asked. "My house, my savings?" The words tasted like bile. I'd wrestled with this in the nights since the letter, and now the monster sat across from me and called it an opportunity. Kyle's laugh was a short, bitter bark. "You're dramatic. But that works in my favor. It shows you care. Care translates to money. Money translates to safety." I reached slowly for the recorder in my pocket, palms steady. "Everything you've said is on this device," I told him, letting the tiny red light show between fabric and skin. "Every implication, every threat. That should make you careful." His jaw clenched at the audacity of it. He leaned back, assessing. "You bluff," he said. "Then prove me wrong," I invited. "Let Emily call me. Let me hear her voice." My tone was tired, but the challenge was clear. Kyle's hand tightened on his coffee cup. The woman's fingers flexed around the phone. For a second, the air tasted metallic, like the moment before a storm releases. "You ask a lot," Kyle said. But I'm not heartless. We could arrange for a call. A short one. With proof. You sign the small stuff now as good faith, a transfer, temporary guardianship for a medical situation, and you get to hear her. Nothing permanent. We can draft it to look temporary. It was bait, explicit now. He could see my eyes, my weakness for the sound of my daughter's voice. He was trying to line me up, make me trade my future for a few reassuring syllables. I paused, letting the offer hang. In that pause, I felt all the nights I'd sat awake wondering if she'd ever call, all the years of empty holidays, all the small griefs pressed into something hard and bright. This was a moment you either broke or bowed to. Give me proof first, I said. A call. A face. Not promises. Not papers. No bluff, no bait. Just the smallest mercy. Kyle studied me as though measuring the wood grain in the table for a weakness to exploit. Finally, he nodded, not graciously but not angrily either. We can do that. Tomorrow. A short call. And then we talk logistics. I left the diner with nothing but a time and a sliver of information. Emily would be available for a call the next night. That was both hope and rope. On the walk back to my car, the sky finally cracked and rain began to fall, steady and thin, as if the world itself wanted to wash the dirt of whatever transaction we'd just begun. I slipped the recorder into my pocket and thumbed the file, making sure it had captured every syllable. Proof, yes, but proof was only the beginning. The event of the night wasn't a fight or a rescue. It was an exchange of terms. Kyle wanted cooperation, I wanted Emily. He wanted leverage, I wanted information. Both of us walked away thinking we'd taken the better part. But for the first time since the letter arrived, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years, focused, not frantic. What I didn't tell him, of course, was the other thing I'd done while we talked. I'd memorized every tick, every inflection, every phrase. I'd noted the woman's phone model and the logo on Kyle's jacket. Little things. A license plate I glimpsed leaving the lot, a name he used once in a joke, that would be useless to a panicked man but valuable to someone patient. Tomorrow's call would either be a lie exposed or a rope to strangle me. Either way, I had the recorder, a few old contacts, and a very long memory. And I had finally stopped hoping for a miracle. I was going to build one. Hope is cruel. It makes you lean in, even when you know the voice on the other end of the line could be a lie. The next day, I could barely sit still. Every tick of the clock dragged like a nail being hammered into the wall. Kyle's promise wasn't worth a dime, but the thought of hearing Emily's voice again, even just a few seconds, twisted my insides. I tried to keep my mind on the plan, but every memory of her childhood came rushing back like someone had turned on a projector in my head. When the phone finally buzzed, I damn near jumped out of my chair. The screen lit with an unknown number. My pulse roared in my ears. I pressed record on the device hidden under a magazine on the table, then answered. Dad? The voice was faint, shaky, but it was hers. Emily. My throat tightened, and for a second, every wall I'd built around myself cracked. Emily. I breathed. Baby, are you okay? Where are you? I can't talk long. She whispered, fear threading her words. There. The line crackled, and suddenly Kyle's voice cut in, smug and clear. Proof enough for you, Paul? My hand gripped the phone so tight it creaked. Let me talk to her. You just did, he said lightly. She's safe, for now. But safety has a price. We'll meet again, and this time you'll come prepared to show you're serious. I forced my tone to tremble, though inside my fury was a furnace. I just need more time. Time's running out. Kyle snapped, the charm gone from his voice. Tomorrow night. Same diner. Bring papers, something that shows good faith. Or you'll regret it. The line went dead. For a moment I just sat there, the silence in the room pressing down on me. My hands shook not from fear, but from the collision of hope and rage. I'd heard her voice. She was alive. But she was trapped, used like a coin in Kyle's filthy game. I replayed the recording, Emily's voice trembling through the static, then Kyle's arrogance pouring through. Proof. Enough to show any cop that this wasn't a misunderstanding. But I needed more, hard evidence, undeniable, the kind that would bury him. That night, I pulled out every scrap I'd collected, documents from the garage, contacts, numbers scribbled on old slips of paper. I called one, an old buddy from the plant who'd gone into private security work. He owed me a favor, and when I told him I needed eyes on a man named Kyle, he didn't hesitate. If Kyle thought I was walking into that diner tomorrow with papers and fear, he was half right. I'd bring papers, sure, but ones of my own making. And fear? Fear was for men with nothing left to fight with. I still had Emily. And that meant I still had everything to fight for. You can rehearse patience until your bones ache, but nothing prepares you for the instant a man like Kyle realizes he's been outplayed, and the way his face falls in that moment is a kind of justice I hadn't known I craved. I slept only an hour that afternoon, then woke and sat in the recliner listening to the house breathe. I dressed slowly, each movement calculated so the stitch in my side wouldn't betray me. If I went in limp, they'd think me an easy mark. If I went in too eager, they'd smell the trap. I wanted them to think they'd lured a tired old dog to heel. In my breast pocket the recorder hummed quietly. In my other pocket, a folded stack of bills lay uselessly inert. The real weapons were patience, preparation, and a handful of people who still remembered that favors get returned. Frank arrived at 5:30, looking the way he always did, solid, a little rough around the edges, like a man who'd carried a toolbox his whole life. Behind him were two guys from the security outfit he now ran, plain clothes, not the kind to make a scene unless ordered. Elaine had called in a favor too. She'd slipped a copy of the restraining documents and a letter of intent to the local detective. Quiet, preemptive moves that would make the sheriff's office take any threat of extortion seriously. I'd printed copies of the bank statements Kyle likely wanted, falsified transfers and phony memos, all bait I intended to use to unmask him. It felt small and petty to set up paperwork and decoys, but Kyle used paperwork as a rope. I intended to knot it around him. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and vinyl polish when we walked in. Kyle sat where he'd asked to sit, like a king at a small table. The woman who'd met me at the park, Shannon, sat closest to him, her phone casually face down. She glanced up with that same smile and then froze when she saw Frank's two men at my elbow. Confidence wavered like a candle in wind. "You're early," Kyle said, like a man pleased to have summoned someone to his stage. "I didn't want to wait," I said. My voice had the right wobble. I let it. "I brought the paperwork. We can do this quietly." I slid the fake transfer forms across the table, cheap photocopies made to look real. In a different life I might have been embarrassed by the deception. Tonight, I felt nothing but purpose. Kyle smiled thinly and reached for the forms. "That's good. Shows you're serious." He didn't look at me when he slid a hand toward his phone. He was used to doing two things at once, charm and calculation. "Before we proceed," I said, and this is where everything had to be perfect, "I'd like Emily to hear my voice. 5 minutes. You can be in the room. Let me speak to her." I let the plea sound raw. It was a device, yes, but we both knew my voice would break if it was real. Kyle's smile cooled. "We agreed, transfer first. She's fragile." Frank's hand tightened on the edge of the booth. One of his men shifted his weight subtly to block any quick exit. I kept my face lined with fatigue. "All right," I said. "One last thing. I'd like a written clause that the money is used for medical care and rehab, signed by someone who guarantees her release." I leaned in and let my voice trail off, as if exhausted. Kyle, who'd thought he was backed by fear, took the bait. Greed makes men sloppy. The scent of a promised payout loosened his tongue. "We can do that," he said to Shannon. "Write it now." She fumbled for her phone but paused, and in that pause, everything pivoted. I hid record on the device in my pocket and didn't bother to hide it. I'd already recorded Shannon and Kyle's calls, but what I needed now was a live moment where they committed themselves in front of witnesses. "Before you sign," I said, "you'll need my bank info." "Of course," Kyle said. He reached for his phone then, and that's when Frank gave the nod. Two plainclothes men stood, blocked the doorway, and the diner's hum dimmed into a silence that felt like glass. The waitress looked around, confused. Elaine's detective walked in behind them, badge tucked inside a jacket, eyes cold and professional. Kyle's grin flickered, then disappeared. "You do realize," the detective said, voice controlled, "that extortion is a crime?" He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The words were administrative and final, like a judge tapping a gavel. Kyle's face went through a sequence I'd seen in 10 years of men getting caught: disbelief, bargaining, panic. He opened his mouth, tried to charm his way out, and the tape on my recorder had him, every syllable. I pushed the recorder across the table and tapped play. Shannon's voice, silky and dangerous, filled the booth. "Help us, or Emily won't be safe." Heads turned. The two security men moved in, not with heavy hands but professional control. Kyle lunged for his jacket like a cornered animal. One of Frank's guys was faster by a fraction and had his arm for a half step. Then the detective stepped forward and read Kyle his rights with that unfussy, bureaucratic authority that strips a man of his bluster. "Do you understand you are under arrest for attempted extortion and unlawful restraint?" the detective asked. Kyle's jaw worked. He stuttered and then fell quiet. Shannon tried to cajole, to negotiate, then realized the phone in her hand betrayed her. Her text trail, the number used to contact me from the indentations, all breadcrumbs. The detective had a warrant already drafted, the kind that gets signed when a good lawyer whispers in the right ear. She paled. The waitress clutched a coffee pot like a talisman. People in the booths murmured. The once-filled confidence in Kyle's posture crumpled into something pitiable. And then, the best part, the detective slid a phone over and said to me, gently, "We can bring Emily in for a safe call. Or if you want, we can locate her. We have reason to believe she may be under duress." My knees weakened a little then, but not from the surgery. From relief that tasted like rain after drought. I stood up carefully and let Frank put a steady hand at my elbow. "I want to talk to my daughter," I said. "Now." Within 20 minutes they arranged a monitored call. The line hummed in the detective's phone, voice quality thin but unmistakable. When Emily's voice came through, not faint this time, but real, she sobbed, and I felt the room tilt. "Daddy," she whispered, and I heard a lifetime in that one syllable. "I'm so sorry." The conversation was short, overseen by law enforcement, with statements made for records. She told me Kyle had manipulated her, used her trust to hide his schemes, and when she tried to leave, he threatened her. She'd been too ashamed to come to me. She'd let guilt and fear keep her trapped. At some point she'd found courage and scribbled a note, an uneven attempt to alert me that something wasn't right, the indentations, the half-erased letters. She hadn't known where else to go but to reach out and hope. When the detective finished the call, he looked at me. "We'll take over now. You did the right thing by recording them, Mr. Harris. It sealed the case." His tone was businesslike but with a sliver of human empathy I appreciated more than he'd know. They led Kyle and Shannon away in handcuffs. People watched, some with pity, some with the grim satisfaction of seeing a bully meet the consequences of his choices. Elaine stayed with me while Frank helped me to my feet and wrapped an arm around my shoulders like a son. I felt both old and suddenly strong, as if the weight I'd carried for 3 years had been eased by the sight of justice enacting itself. The detective took my statement, then explained the next steps. Kyle would be held for questioning, his phone and devices seized, Shannon's cooperation assessed. They'd work to corroborate Emily's account and push charges. The legal machinery would grind and it would take time, but it would move. Emily came home 2 nights later, not in a dramatic sprint into my arms but quietly, like someone stepping back into daylight after a long, difficult night. She was thinner, a little bruised in places she didn't want to talk about, eyes ringed with fatigue, but alive. We sat at the kitchen table for hours, talking and not talking, holding tea that went cold between us. There were apologies that needed saying and ones I offered that needed to be heard. We spoke in pieces at first, rebuilding, realigning. I apologized for the ways I'd pressed her, for the times my protection had felt like control. She explained the things she hadn't told me, the shame, the dread, the complicated loyalty to a man who'd lied to her until she forgot what truth sounded like. Revenge, I discovered, tastes different than I'd imagined. It wasn't in watching Kyle cuffed and led away, though that did warm something in my chest. It wasn't in tearing up papers or shouting black-faced curses. The real satisfaction was quieter. It was in the steady work of bringing my daughter back from an edge I hadn't even known she stood upon. It was ensuring the man who'd used her could no longer threaten her or anyone else. In the days that followed, there were statements, subpoenas, and a slow, meticulous turning of wheels. I ignored the temptation to reopen old battles or revisit past grievances. That fight was for another time, another chapter. Right now, I held Emily's hand, counted the freckles on the back of it, and listened as she laughed, haltingly at first, then with more conviction. I'd set a trap and watched my enemy walk into it. But the best part, the unexpected and grateful part, was getting my daughter back and realizing that revenge had a way of turning into something better, justice, and the beginning of the work it takes to make a life whole again. That was my story. Now I'd like to hear yours. Share it in the comments below.